Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Catheta webinar. We're coming to you live on December 20th. For those who don't already know, Catheta means learning in Creek. And today we'll be learning about the updates to federal regulations for tribes. And this is Uniform Guidance Part 2. Uniform Guidance Part 1 did occur yesterday. So if any of you weren't able to make it to that webinar, there is a link to the recording posted in the web links. And the slides from yesterday are also included in the files. So just something to keep in mind. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could join us today. If you could follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. But before we get started, I want to familiarize you with some of the features that are available and how the environment works. If you look at the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you could either raise your hand, agree, disagree, or step away. And your screen should look similar to this graphic here. So to the bottom left, you'll see a box that says Files. So here's where you can find a copy of today's slides, as well as the Part 1 slides from yesterday. And Vince has also included some materials for you. So feel free to download some copies for yourselves. You just click the item you want to download and click the arrow pointing to download and save it onto your device. The next box over is labeled Web Links. This is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with some of the links that are going to be found throughout the presentation today. And again, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, number 6 is a link to the recording of yesterday's webinar, which was Part 1. So finally, all the way to the right, you have our chat box available. This is how you'll communicate with the instructor and the NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can just type them into the chat box and I can let Vince know. Just type your message and hit enter, or you can click the up arrow button icon to submit. We do encourage class participation, so feel free to write in those questions or comments. And if you end up having any tech support problems, that could also be submitted there. Know that most issues could be solved by just exiting and then re-entering the meeting room. And let's go ahead and try out the chat box together as a group. If you guys could all let us know what your name, where you're joining us from, and your tribal affiliation. All right, folks. With that, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your instructor for today, Vince Franco. And Vince, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
All right, thank you, Brooke. Oh, and by the way, people, welcome back for those who were here yesterday, and hello to any of you that are new to the program. And I see some folks are following Brooke's lead here and putting some information into the chat box. Thank you very much, Bliss and Marvin and Brooke. But if you have any questions as well from yesterday, I'm looking for that. I appreciate the fact that you're telling, we've got people from all over the country here coming in. But if you have any particular questions, we covered a lot of territory yesterday when we were going over the uniform guidance. We talked about the basic, what's in effect right now with the 2 CFR Part 200. And then I also talked about some of the changes that are coming up to be expected. So what I want to do before we get into what you see on the screen there, subpart E followed by subpart F, I want to just go back for a minute and talk about the 4 sections that we covered yesterday, subparts A, B, C, and D. And if you have pen or pen, your laptop or your pencil or pen or whatever type of writing you need to do, I want to go through and give you the citation numbers for you to take a deeper look at when you have the time to digest this information. As you recall, we started, one of the things we did, we went over subpart A, which is the section at the very beginning of the uniform guidance, obviously, that covers acronyms and definitions. There's really no change in the acronyms, but some of the definitions have changed. And I just want to point out in that section, these new updates coming on, there's all kinds of, there's four different things that they were trying to do that are included in the definition. One, they're removing some information, and some of the stuff that they're removing really, for all practical purposes, do not really have much impact on us on our daily operation. They're adding some information and some definitions, and some of it applies to us, and we'll get into specifics on that in a minute. They're also revising thresholds. That's one of the big things in two particular areas, equipment and supplies. Potentially, again, all of this is potential because, as you recall, the release date was September 21st. Here we are, October, November, December, 3 months later, almost to the day, and I haven't seen anything on a final notice, but stand by that, that will happen. And I'm sure the Native Learning Center will come out with some kind of notice. I know Brooks I'll be watching it, Brooks watching it, her supervisors are watching it, everyone is, to see when these new regulations, particularly me, and I'll be in touch with the Native Learning Center. We'll want to put out information immediately once that update has been released to the general public. So we're 3 months and counting now. You would think we're beyond the 90-day window for comments. So you think some of this, and I'm as eager as anyone to see what if any, of these updates will be approved and how the final version will, what it'll look like. We talked about Section B yesterday, and I said that a lot of Section B, which is general provisions, applies to the agencies and not so much to us. But I want you to write down 3 particular citations that are in Section B that might have some impact. 2 CFR Part 200, 201, 101, 2 CFR Part 200.101, applicability, 102, exceptions, and 104, which is called supersession. I suspect that all 3 of those are going to move forward. The last one there, 104, what supersession means is it'll be the final rule. It'll supersede all previous regulations. So whatever comes out in January and February will be the uniform guidance to work with. No, the older one, the one we're looking at right now, which is the current version, will become obsolete. So you really want to make sure you stay on top of this from a regulation standpoint. Okay. That's subpart B. There are only 3 potential changes in B. C, subpart C, which is the pre-federal award requirements. Again, a lot of it pertains to the agencies and not so much to us as recipients, but there are 7 potential changes in subpart B. So let me give you those particular citations so you can mark them down, and then at your leisure you could do a deeper dive and go back and look at it. Okay, in subpart C, which is the 200s, 2 CFR Part 200.201, use of grant agreements. They're talking about additional certifications to address risk, again, from the agency standpoint, not so much from the recipient standpoint. But I think what that's going to translate into is more restrictions put upon us, in every way, shape, or form, from our audits to our program reviews and everything. Okay, so that's 201. Also contained in 201 are some, hopefully, it says more specifics on certain prior approval. They're talking about eliminating some of the 15, I think it's 15 prior approvals that need to be put in place. You need to have a prior approval if you're changing your budget, if you're going to have program income. There's all kinds of prior approvals. Now they're talking about, which I think would be good for us, eliminating some of those, but they don't tell much more than that at this point. Okay, 2 CFR Part 200.202, program planning. They've got a couple things considered there, so mark that one down. 200.204, notice of funding opportunities. Not so much for us, but again, for the agencies. They're talking about revamping the notice of funding opportunities, the NOFOs, to make them more kind of user-friendly, more readable, and also using their words here, focus on unserved communities to be consistent and transparent, attempting to ensure that applicants are not unintentionally excluded from funding opportunities. And I think what they're doing here is they're focusing on small tribes and small communities, trying to help them. So that's a good thing. All right, 205, 2 CFR Part 200.205, merit review. Certifies that agency should consider diversity. Again, agency mandates. 200.206, risk review. That whole section is on risk. Okay, the big one here clarifies that agency processes may consider any risk criteria pertinent to the program, such as cyber security risk or impacts on local jobs and community. This whole thing about cybersecurity and the risk associated with it, we just talked a little bit about it yesterday, is a big issue. Cybersecurity is when we talk about risk, when we talk about fraud, when we talk about hacking, when we talk about identity theft, cybersecurity is a real burning issue. So I suspect there's going to be more protocols put in place with cybersecurity issues. Okay, so that's 200.206. 200.216 is that prohibition on telecommunications we were talking about yesterday, AV equipment, surveillance equipment from the Chinese companies. Using their words here, they're saying several additions. So looks like they're double downing on that. That was a carryover from the Trump administration. But it says several additions. I don't know what that means, quote unquote, additions on the prohibition on certain telecommunications. That has not gone away. Okay. And then a brand new one, not so much a change, 2 CFR Part 200.217, brand new. It doesn't exist right now. If you go to the regs right now, it stops at 216. 217, new. They don't even have a name for it yet. Adding a new section to expand on whistleblower protections. Whistleblower. So, this is all revolving around fraud and mismanagement of funds, that type of thing. That's what whistleblower protection is all about. Making sure that people who, go to the authorities are not persecuted in some way. So I don't know how that's going to shake out or what, but that's 2 CFR Part 200.217, brand new regulation to be rolled out. It'll be really interesting to see what that says. And then we finished up yesterday talking about Subpart D, post-award requirements. And that's where the bulk of changes, D and E, which we'll get to in a minute, but D's got 15 of them. So I'm just going to give you the citation number so you can mark these down, and I'll try to comment on the ones that I think are more significant than others. Okay, we'll start. These are the 300s. 2 CFR Part 200.300, statutory requirement. They're putting more verbiage into the regulations to reinforce non-discrimination. That's what it says. Okay, 305, 2 CFR Part 200.305, federal payment, no insignificant change there. 306 was the cost sharing matching. And I'm just going to read the quote right from the proposed verbiage. Revises cost sharing to clarify that matching is one category of cost sharing overall, thus eliminating the need to repeat the term matching throughout the regulation. So it looks like they're phasing out the word matching. There seems to be some confusion between what is cost sharing, what is matching. To the feds, it means the same thing. So they're eliminating that word matching, and they're apparently just going to go with cost sharing. Okay, but I guess on a small scale that does help clarify. Then 2 CFR Part 200.307, program income, clarifies use and expenditures, including allowing program income from certain closeout costs. So go to it's not there yet. but at some point go to 307, which is about program income. That's what it's all about. And the second thing in that area is clarifying the three methods of use for program income. So if you want to do a deeper dive on program income, right now there's information on it, but looks like they're going to tighten the reins a little bit on program income, but I don't know what it's going to say yet. We don't know that. But 307, circle that, mark that one down. 308, revision of budget or program plans. This is an area where you need prior approval when you start changing your budget or your scope of work. Let's see what it says here. Clarifies items requiring prior approval, including requesting additional funds, transferring funds, and no cost extension. So it looks like, I'm not quite sure how to interpret that, whether it's going to be a tightening or loosening of that. I'm suspecting more the latter, that they're going to loosen that requirement on prior approval for changes to budget amounts. Okay. Let's see. 213. So 2 CFR Part 200, 213. Equipment. We talked about that one yesterday, increasing the threshold from 5,000 to 10,000. Let's see. Another one. I'm still in that same area, equipment. We didn't talk about this yesterday. Now that I got my hands on this, there's another one here within equipment. So I'm still in 313. Allows for tribes to dispose of equipment in accordance with tribal law. Interesting. I don't, maybe what they're doing is they're eliminating the protocols that they have in the regulations that you're supposed to follow a disposition type process. Disposition means how you're going to dispose of assets once you've used them, you have no more use. And it looks like when it comes to equipment that they're going to say whatever the tribe has in its internal controls within its policies, you can go with. I hope that's how it comes out. That would be a big help of disposing of equipment, especially expensive equipment, earth moving equipment and things like that. All right, because those are very, very expensive. Let's see. They're putting that enhances the reinforcement of the recipient. That's you. Your responsibility to maintain updated records on equipment. So the equipment you do have, they want to make sure that the equipment, your tracking system, your information on those assets is up to date. Everything is following generally accepted accounting practices. If you're depreciating the value of equipment, etc. So I suspect maybe some tightening up when it comes to record keeping for equipment. All right, so that's 313, 2 CFR Part 200, 314. I'm still in Section D here, supplies. The significant one there was the increase from 5,000 to 10,000. We talked about that yesterday. Okay. 317 gets into procurement. That's a big section. 317, 318, and 319 are very important. Oh, my chat box just did something weird. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. Bear with me here for a second. If I can go back. Here we go. Okay. 2 CFR Part 200, 317, procurement. 317, 318, 319. But 317 allows tribes to follow their own policies and procedures. That is huge. It could be huge. It could mean procurement that whole section says that you're supposed to follow the protocols that are laid out in the federal regulations, right? For sealed bid and for competitive and for sole source. That's what's contained in section 319 and 320 coming up here. Now it's saying that, if I'm reading this correctly, allows tribes to follow their own policies and procedures, which means you can, as long as you have internal controls and policies and procedures with that clearly define your procurement process, then you're good to go. You can. I really hope they put a big circle around that one. 2 CFR Part 200.317 procurement, and also 318 and 319. The following 318 is general procurement standards. Well, oh yeah. Besides that, I haven't changed the slides. Here we go. I'm sorry. Let me move forward here. I'm just doing 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2, just a review before we get into subpart E. Subpart E. I want to make sure you were wondering. Yeah, I'm just going back, no slides, just review, because I want to make sure everyone this is just a quick review before we get in, and I want you to mark this down. This stuff that's like breaking news, because I've got specific citations here in the regulations, and I want you to at least circle or write them down so you can go back and look, and then we'll go into subpart E and F. So bear with me a few more minutes, but I didn't want to freak anyone out. Sorry, Brooke. Sorry, everyone in the audience there. Not trying to confuse you. I was kind of hovering before we go in. I'm still talking about section 318 and 319 in subpart D. Write those down or circle them, along with 320 is procurement. We're almost done here doing the review. 320 is the method for procurement. The only thing in 2 CFR Part 200, 320, we talked about it a little bit, was the potential change that the sealed bid process does not need to be opened in public. Remember, I mentioned that yesterday, and so I want you to make that note in your notes. That's the big change in the procurement standards of 2 CFR Part 200, 320. 328 talks about financial reporting, no big change there. 329 gets into monitoring and reporting program performance. The verbiage I have there is new language coming out. We don't know what it is, that emphasizes the importance of measuring customer experience. So we'll have to see what that is. That's the trend as well, moving towards customer satisfaction. Interesting. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there so you could write these down, circle these, go back and visit at your leisure. And now let's go into subpart E and subpart F. We'll start with E, which is cost principles, what's allowable, what's not allowable according to the regulations right now. I will do my best now that we're kind of caught up with everything. There are 15 different changes proposed in subpart E on the cost principles. So most of them are small, but when we come across the big one, I'll try to point it out to you. So you can circle that one now. Now we're up to real time. All right. So little quick poll. I know Brooke will help me with this. How familiar are you with this whole section, subpart E, cost principles? Your answers are pretty much the same as they were yesterday. Okay, I've heard of them, but not sure the details. Okay, I know of them, but can use a refresher. Okay, that's what we're going to do. You're right. You're in the right place. I figured most people would fall into the B and C category. No one's really an expert on all of these regulations, let alone the changes coming. Thank you, Brooke. All right, so let's move on. Some QR code resources. I mentioned this yesterday, the ecfr.gov, my favorite place to go to get the regulations. You can also check there for the updates on all the subparts, all the regulations. It's my favorite place to go to look for the regs because of the way that they're laid out, and they're very user friendly. Okay. Subpart E is all about cost principles, what's allowable, what's unallowable. So let's kind of walk through here so you get an idea. I will point out areas where there might be some changes. Not on here. 400 also gets into telling about what cost principles are, the application of cost principles based on the fundamental premise. So let's read through this real quick. That the non-federal entity is responsible for efficient and effective administration with, here's that phrase, reasonable assurance. Remember, I talked about that yesterday. Reasonable assurance, which means in government speak, to the best of your ability. We always want to use that phrase because it's a federal phrase. It's the phrase that you see in this document. We want to use that phrase in our internal controls, in our policies and procedures, because the feds do. And that gives us a little bit of wiggle room when we're trying to administer our program and be consistent. As that third paragraph says, it's all about consistency. That's what compliance is about, consistency. Okay, and at the bottom, NFB in recognition of its own unique combination of staff, facilities, experience, has the primary responsibility for employing whatever form of sound organizational and management techniques they need to be necessary in order to assure proper and efficient administration of the federal award. They don't, in other words, they don't tell us how to manage our program too much. I mean, they give us some guidelines, but in a lot of places, like we saw yesterday, what they say about internal controls is very minimal. That leaves us the burden of trying to put together a management system that oversees our operations, our financial activities, and our compliance. It meets all the letter of the law and all the protocols that need to be put in place. We are responsible for that. Okay, let's keep going. All right, 403. 403 is one that is subject to change, but there's not a lot of definite, it's minor, right? So what you see in front of you here for 403, I don't expect, see the little orange box there? I don't expect much to happen here. Allowability of costs is still you still have to make sure that your costs, the monies that the federal funds that you're using to buy expenses and to buy, the cost that you incur are allowable. That's not going to change. To be, all those things there, be necessary and reasonable, conform to limitations and or exclusions, be consistent with your internal controls, your policies and procedures, be treated consistently, be in accordance with generally accepted accounting practices, and be adequately documented. That's not going to change. I don't see that changing. Those are all pretty straightforward. Okay. Reasonable cost. This is section 404. Don't expect any change here. Reasonable costs are just that. They're reasonable. The definition of reasonable cost is not going to change. It's been around forever, for hundreds of years. The cost is reasonable if, in its nature and amount, it does not exceed that which would be incurred by, quote unquote, the prudent person. That phrase, prudent person, has been around since 1850. Believe it or not. The prudent person makes logical decisions for the better of the organization. And that's what they're talking about here when they talk about reasonable cost under the circumstances prevailing at the time. I love that phraseology, under the circumstances prevailing at the time, which means we have a default, we have a system in place, we have procurement, we have compliance, but from time to time, we are going to step outside of that and do what we need to do. We might have to do a sole source procurement, and that's probably because we have an emergency situation, active nature, something, hurricane, flooding, tornado. But for the most part, we're going to rely on our normal protocols, unless there's some kind of prevailing situation. Okay, that's what it's talking about here. And just bring this to your attention because the phraseology is important. And I think some of the phrases that they use here, like reasonable assurance and circumstances, prevailing circumstances, those are phrases that we need to understand and adopt in our language, in our internal controls, because they give us leverage and flexibility to do what's right. But also when things happen, we have a way to protect ourselves and our program and our colleagues. So we want to be able to use these terms because these are the terms the government uses in its internal controls. I hope that makes sense. That's always been my approach in putting this together. All right, cost principles. Now we're in the 405. No change here. Allocable still remains as allocable. You've got to be able to assign your cost to a line item in your budget. That's basically what allocable means. You can allocate it either as a direct cost or an indirect cost, but it has a place to go. It's in your budget. It's got a line item perhaps that you can assign it. It's allocable. That's what they mean. The cost is allocable if the goods and services involved are chargeable or assignable to a cost objective, either direct or indirect, in accordance with the benefits received. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. No changes there. I don't see any change in that definition. I think I might have jumped over one here. Yeah, 407. We're going to see, I think, a lot of changes here, though. I just alluded to a couple right out of the gate. I talked about cost sharing and matching. They're talking about dropping the phrase matching. Okay. Program income was the second one. Revisions to budget and programs. There are actually 15 of them. So what you want to do to get an idea what they are is go to 2 CFR Part 200 407, see what they are, and then there'll be a list of 15 with the citation reference numbers. And then from there, you cross-reference. You can go to the actual citation. You can go to 307, for example, to program income and do a deeper dive and read about that, knowing that there might be changes coming to the existing definition. They might be tightening, if anything, probably not loosening up in program income. However, they're also talking about eliminating, just totally eliminating prior written approval in about 10 of the 15 different areas. So, it's a mixed bag, tightening here, loosening there. Prior approvals are theoretically, there's 15 of them. If they eliminate 10 or even 5, that's going to help us, I think, in the long run, be more efficient at what we do. It'll help us, do our job, our daily activity more effectively without having to stop, go to our funding source, get approval, and then get back into it. Some of the areas I'm looking at the change here, potentially, some of 10 areas, potentially, written approval loosening or totally eliminating in areas of equipment, real property, direct cost, entertainment costs. That's interesting. We'll get to that. Exchange rates, membership, participant costs, selling and marketing, and taxes. Interesting. So circle that one, write that down. Prior approval, that's 2 CFR Part 407. Okay, let's keep going. 413, no changes here. Direct, and 414 would be indirect cost. 413, what is, a direct cost is program driven, and indirect cost would be all the other costs we have, that are not assigned to a particular cost item as a direct cost. They're not program driven, for example. They might be overhead related. The shared cost of the tribe's legal department or IT department or accounting department, or any of the overhead costs associated with operating, literally the utilities and things like that. Those are the obvious ones that would fall into direct cost, because other departments, you're sharing the cost. That's a way to look at it. A lot of the funding programs like the Indian Housing Block Grant also have an indirect cost rate built into them. As you can see at the bottom, 20% is what it is for the Indian Housing Block Grant. However, the tribe might have an indirect cost rate that's higher. I know the Seminole Tribe is more like 28% as opposed to the 20% for Indian Housing Block Grant. So it all depends on the program and the tribe. Everyone's a little bit different. But these aren't going to change. You're not going to see any changes in direct or indirect costs. Okay. Here we get into the real bread and butter of subpart E. This is the biggest section here, 200.420. And that is what's referred to as selected items of cost. In other words, the next batch of slides, several of them, slides have several, well, I'll show you in a minute, represent what's allowable and what's unallowable. And the note I have is for this, I don't expect much changes in the individual cost items, but what it says here is Section 420 as a whole might change in the way that it clarifies the selected items of cost that are not a comprehensive list. That's what it's saying. And failure to list an item does not make it allowable or unallowable, which means they may add more items to the list you're about to see. So what am I talking about? Let me get right into it, these are referred to as select items of cost. And each one of them, you can see there's 4 of them listed here. What you see in these horizontal displays here are the particular item that the cost item that they're talking about. For example, advertising and public relations, a quick definition of if they are allowable or unallowable. Now, this is just a paraphrasing. What you see, for example, with advertising, it says allowable. Advertising of the recruitment of personnel required for the non-federal entity for performance of a federal award. The feds look at the phrase advertising in public relations is very specific. You need to go to 2 CFR Part 2 421 to look at a little closer definition of advertising. You have to be careful with word usage, and this is one example. The term advertising is very specific. According to the feds, if you read 421, it talks about advertising basically exclusively being used to recruit, for example, recruit people to become employees, or to solicit general contractors, for example, in a sealed bid process. The cost of soliciting putting your request for proposal out in the, let's say, if anyone uses the newspapers these days, there's a cost for doing that. And that, according to the federal government, is advertising. So it has a very specific use. All of these do. So let's move through them. Some of them are quite obvious, like the next one. You're not supposed to use federal funds in any way, shape, or form for the purchase of alcoholic beverages. Now, food and beverage is wide open. You can, but alcoholic beverages, no. So that's why it's got a line through it. You can go to 421 and read up on that a little bit. Audit services, allowable. That's 425. Bad debts, unallowable. You make poor business decisions, get the organization or their department in trouble financially because of a series of poor investment with your program income, or just poor business decisions, and incur bad debt, that you can't use your federal funds to bail you out of any bank fees or things like that. Now, if you make a mistake, that's one thing, but a series or a pattern of bad debt, you cannot use federal funds to do that. Bonding is an allowable cost. Collection of improper payment, that's the mistake I'm talking about. That is not bad debt. Collection of improper payment is a mistake. You made a mistake, you made a payment of some kind, you incurred a bank fee or a canceled check fee. These things happen. These are accounting processes. They happen from time to time. We try to minimize them, right? But when they occur, it's really not a problem unless it turns into a pattern of bad decisions. Then it becomes bad debt. Then we got a problem. All right, compensation. And the next one on the next slide is fringe benefits. So it's 2 CFR Part 200, 430, and 431. These are probably the 2 biggest sections in the 400s here in subpart E, because especially fringe benefits. Compensation to pay employees, either salary or an hourly wage or some kind of compensation, is allowable using federal funds. So as we go on to the next slide here, fringe benefits. But fringe benefits itself, I've just captured, it's allowable generally speaking, but you got to do a deeper dive here. Fringe benefits is the one area where there's a lot of creativity and a lot of variations of what we call a fringe benefit these days. And you got to be careful to be consistent and what is allowable as a fringe and what is not allowable as a fringe benefit. And some organizations get very, very creative when it comes to fringe benefit packages, especially for executives. So you've got to be very, very careful. But if from all practical standards, your regular payroll with your regular package of fringe benefit that applies to everyone consistently, not a problem. It is an allowable expense. The next one, conferences, has gone through a real morphosis over the past couple of years. It used to be, it didn't have this title. So the phrase conferences, which means, as you can see at the very first sentence, a conference is basically a meeting, a retreat, a seminar, a symposium, a workshop, an event, with a caveat here, with the primary purpose of disseminating technical information. Write that phrase down and capitalize it. Disseminate technical information. So what does that mean? It means if you're going to have some kind of a function and use federal funds internally, like let's say a Christmas party, because we're at that time of the year, you've got to be, it's always, in the past, it's always been kind of iffy if you can use federal funds. Do you get yourself in trouble by using federal funds? It used to be that you could not use federal funds for food and beverage. Now, you've seen the middle of the section there, food and beverage is included. They've really opened this up with a couple understandings. One is that you're going to, if you do have some kind of a function internally, that it has a business purpose, or there's a part of the meeting that has technical information, which means there's a business function to it. And that's what they mean, dissemination of technical information. You have an agenda, you might, whatever, mostly just having an agenda with a couple business items. Now you've got a legitimate meeting. And from there, it's kind of wide open. The other thing that they've included, and you got to look very closely at this one, is at the end of the paragraph there, where it says it may include rental of facilities, speakers' fees, cost of meals and refreshments, as I alluded to a moment ago, local transportation. So if you're going to hire shuttle service or a bus, or to move people from the airport to your facility, that's reasonable as long as you're not using high-end stretch limos. You're okay doing that. It's the tag there at the end of that sentence. And other incidental items. That was never in the definition before. Is this referring to programmatic events too, or just other events? And it's referring, Marvin, to all events. The event you're doing now, if there was a fee associated with this training, of course, that would be included because it's business related. Where it gets sketchy is when we use federal funds to do programs and training and retreats and things internally, and we're using federal funds for internal programs or conferences or symposiums, retreats or getaways. Those are the ones where, should we use federal funds or do we use private funds? Now they're saying you can use federal funds as long as you're disseminating technical information. So if you're going to have a retreat for your department or for your nonprofit, you can do it. You can use federal funds, but there must be a tie back to the organization, to the mission. That's the technical information catch. You've got to make sure you're doing that. And what I'm pointing out also is at the end of that sentence, other incidental items. What does that's wide open. What's an incidental item? Well, it's whatever you need, as long as it's reasonable by a prudent person. It's reasonable, it's allocable, it's allowable, and you're not, spending a fortune on it. That's the stretch limo, for example. So this whole area has been expanded on conferences, whether you're going to a conference and traveling or whether you're holding something internal. I'm sorry, we jumped ahead. Let me go back. Ooh, really jumped ahead. This is where we were. So let's keep going. Good question, Marvin. Good point of interest. Construction, remodeling, allowable, if it's, specific. Here, specific prior approval. That's probably one area that might be eliminated. The prior approval for your normal everyday cost of doing restructuring or rehabilitation on housing units, if you're getting housing money, Indian Housing Block Grant, for example. Depreciation has always been an allowable cost, depreciation of equipment and anything incurred there. Equipment in general is allowable as long as it's reasonable cost, along with, the bottom one there, exchange rates, probably doesn't apply to most tribes unless you're in upstate New York, upstate Montana, and you border the Canadian border or something like that, and you're spending some of your time and energy and cost purchasing Canadian products, then you might have an exchange rate issue. Other than that, it's probably not going to affect a whole lot of tribal entities. Fines, penalties, damages, generally based on poor business decisions. No, you can't use federal funds to bail yourself out of prison or any of your colleagues. You just can't do that. That's what they mean there. You've got to be careful. Intellectual property is new. That could be your software. If you have software design in any way, shape, or form, that's intellectual property, and the cost involved with developing and protecting, in some cases, intellectual property is allowable. That's what it means there, intellectual property. Developing software is the best example I can think of. Interest, anything we're done with. And then in the middle there, lobbying, of course, unallowable. You cannot use federal funds to influence legislation. I don't see any changes in that area. Let me double check my notes. Conferences. Okay, no their membership over there. Okay, no changes that I can see that are proposed. Anything that we've talked about in these blue highlighted areas so far. Okay, keep going forward. Maintenance, repair costs, again related to normal wear and tear, replacement, maintenance, that type of thing, not a problem. Material supply costs, that's whether it's for housing or anything, those are allowable. So that's section 453. No changes there that I can see. Proposed changes: memberships, participant costs, in participant support costs. I don't see anything there. It talks primarily about travel, subsistence and travel. Travel, this one is kind of like the one we'll see at the end of it, travel and the cost of going to training and the travel involved with it. Those are all allowable costs. So if you're going on, now this program is free of cost, but if you were going off site, if you're going to, I don't know, Chicago to go to some kind of a training program hosted by Eastern Woodlands EWONAP office, you've got airfare, maybe you got to rent a car, you've got the cost of the training itself, you've got the per diem, you've got the lodging. As long as you're following, you have reasonable costs, and as long as you're following GSA protocols, pretty much, for the cost of the airfare, the cost of the lodging, the cost of your per diem, you're okay. But now let me just pause there for a second, because I said if you're following the GSA rates for lodging and for per diem and for airfare, well, GSA doesn't give you the cost of travel, but it does for lodging and it does for meals and incidental costs. So you have a choice here, by the way. You can follow, and most tribes do follow GSA protocols for lodging and for per diem, but you don't have to. You can, if the Seminole Tribe of Florida is a perfect example. They had their own rate that they established for lodging and for per diem. So they circumvented GSA rates in those two areas, and they had just a flat rate. They tried to book people in hotels at the GSA rate where they could, but there were exceptions to that. It's almost impossible to meet GSA rates if you're trying to establish lodging in a big city like Chicago. And then they had their own per diem rate. So we didn't follow the ups and downs of the GSA rate for per diem based on the city and the state that you are in, because they fluctuate all over the place. So the tribe came out with a flat sum, and that's what they stuck with. Now, when it comes to airfare and car rental, things like that, airfare, what you're supposed to, there is no GSA rate for airfare. What you're supposed to do is use purchase coach tickets, not first class, not business class, not any of those upgrades, but regular coach airfare. Now, if your particular traveler that you bought the coach ticket for is a frequent flyer, for example, on Delta, like I am, and I can upgrade without any cost or changing the cost of the ticket, then knock yourself out. That's fine. But we're supposed to keep the cost low. We're not supposed to put people in business in first class. That makes sense. Same thing with the hotel. We're supposed to use GSA rate or equivalent or something within that range to the best of our ability. And to the but like we saw before with reasonable assurance, sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you cannot, for safety reasons or just because there's something going on in the city. You cannot book a room for the GSA rate. You got to pay the extra bucks. As long as your budget has it, as long as you document the fact, then you're okay. That's to protect your program. So let's keep going on. Plant and security costs allowable to protect the workers, to protect the equipment, to protect the assets, whatever you spend on it, as long as you are not breaking any of the moratorium rules that they put in place, like the surveillance equipment and AV equipment moratorium from the 7 Chinese companies for surveillance equipment. We're not supposed to use those companies, spend federal funds on them, on the purchase of equipment or service agreements, etc. But at the same time, it's allowable to spend money in general on plant and security costs. So we can do that. All right, what else do I'm going through the P's, jump ahead, pre-award. A lot of these things don't apply to us. Plant and security is the same thing as what we just talked a moment ago. It's allowable to put mechanisms in place and processes to protect our colleagues, to protect the buildings we might work in, and to protect the assets, whether they're tangible or intangible. And the money we spend on it, the federal funds, is legitimate. We can do that. Let's get to the end here. There's a lot of these. What about personnel for security? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's all part of security. That's all part of protection of the people that work, of the facilities that we work in, and of the assets that we need to protect. So personnel for security, whether they're armed or unarmed, is an irrelevant point. If you want to have armed guards, if you're in your particular office or the tribe's in kind of a dangerous area, so to speak, then yes. If you're in a remote area and armed guards are not needed, but you still need security, not only for protection, but for theft, to mitigate theft situations of equipment, supplies, that type of thing. Absolutely, you can do that. Again, good question there. Yes, it does apply. Right in the middle, there's that telecommunication we talked about before. Unallowable, generally speaking, yeah, you can buy audio visual equipment, surveillance equipment. And as Marvin is talking about, although it's in a different cost area, security to protect people, buildings, and to discourage theft and what's the word I'm looking for? Not vandalism and things like that. Yes. Travel costs, going to training, not a problem, as long as it's related to the mission of the organization or to the funding. So if you're going off site for more training on this and you got to go to Cincinnati and you've got the money in the budget to do it, those are all allowable costs if we follow the GSA standards or something similar to that and keep our costs relatively low, because that's what we are burdened to do, then you're okay. All right. That is section E of the cost principles. 15 proposed changes there. I tried to highlight the areas. They're minor. This is an area where the changes are kind of minor. They're not radically changing the areas in here. I just want to see if you have any other questions before we go on to the last section, section F, which you all are going to love a lot. I know you're going to really like this. Okay, let's go on to the last one, and that is audit requirements. Okay, again, if you have any questions. Now, as far as proposed changes, I don't see a slew of changes here. Let's jump ahead. Oh, I forgot. We have a quiz. Okay, let's stop for a second. If Brooke is ready, 200-405, allowable cost states that the cost is allocable if the goods and services involved are more than 10,000 but less than 250,000, inexpensive and attainable, chargeable and assignable, of good quality and delivered on time. What do you see as an answer there? For allocable cost to a cost objective in accordance with relative benefits received. Well, it's got to be chargeable and assignable. As long as you can charge it, to a cost item and it's related to the program in some way, shape, or form, you're good. Okay. Forgot we had that quiz there. So now we're going to get into the last section of the uniform guidance. Not a lot of changes in this area, but the one change is significant in this area. And we've alluded to some of the other changes coming, and I'll point them out again as we progress through this last section. And again, if you've got any questions, put them out there. We're in the bottom right there, a couple resources, and then we're going to talk about the auditing requirements that we all got to go through at some point, right? Another poll. How familiar are you with this section? Yes, Lisa. Yes, it is. As long as it's reasonable cost. Now let's get this poll out of the way, then I'll go back to Lisa's excellent question, because it's the trend these days. Okay, I know some of the terms. Okay, let's go through it. Thank you, Brooke. Everyone's kind of falling into the same, but this particular area I see, we had more people unexposed to this. So this is an area you probably are relying on your accounting department and your financial people to do. That's my educated guess. But not that you're going to do it, not that you're the financial person, but you need to understand what is contained in these regulations and the repercussions that come from or could come from something being done wrong. So we want to make sure we understand. Now back to Lisa's question, and excellent, is trip protection cost for a flight allowed? This is the trend these days. I see it a lot because I travel a lot. All the airlines are doing that now, trip protection in case there's a cancellation or, when COVID came through, as we talked about yesterday, it disrupted everything. And we got weather issues to deal with. So airlines are making this more and more available. Trip protection insurance, basically, if you want protection, if your flight is canceled for whatever reason. I would say, I'm going to give you a short answer and a little bit longer answer. Yes, it's allowable because it's related to the trip. But you got to be careful. Does the benefit of the cost of using federal funds to pay that cancellation insurance offset the cost of the ticket? In other words, hopefully the insurance is not as expensive as the ticket itself. Usually not, as I recall. Yes, you can do that. It's part of travel, and it's a trend that there's no specific regulations on flight cancellation costs. You're not going to find anything on that. What you're going to find in the regulations on travel is issues on reasonable cost. It's allowable, but does it meet? In this regard, I would say if the tribe has a policy on it that it's allowable, or if it's on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the length of the trip, and the urgency of the trip, and the weather conditions, you want to have internal controls. You want to have policy and procedure that that explains it, and you got to have money in the budget, obviously, to be able to do it. If you meet all those parameters, then move forward with it. Good question, Lisa. Thank you. Okay, that's my ecfr.gov, my go-to for the federal regulations. So let's just go through here and then we'll finish. When we're done here, we're basically finished with the program. So let's use the 30 minutes we have here in regulation time to talk about the very last section here, and that is the financial components, the audits. Not that you're going to be responsible for them or have to do them, but you need to know, what what's going to happen during these audits and what happens in worst case scenarios with audits. And I'll try to highlight any potential changes. And I think the first one is here in 501. We're in the 500s now. This is as far as it goes with the uniform guidance. Audit requirements. This is the big one. There's only 4 changes in here. 3 of them are minor. This is the huge one if it comes through. Right now, the regulations say in 2 CFR Part 200, 501, audit requirements, that if the non-federal entity expends or receives more than $750,000 per program year in federal funds, they are required to have what's called a single audit. Okay, it's an audit, but it's a specialized audit for recipients of federal funds. That's why it's called the single audit. All right, they are proposing, as you can see in the orange box, moving that threshold from 750,000 to $1 million. We'll see if that comes to fruition or some point in between or more. I don't know at this point if it's going to. What it would mean if it goes to 1 million is if you are receiving $999,000 in federal funds, you wouldn't be eligible. You wouldn't have to go through the protocols of a single audit. So keep a watch for that. Circle that one. Audit requirements 2 CFR Part 200, 501. Will it increase from 750,000, the current level as it is right now, up to $1 million? Who knows? We'll keep an eye on that. That's the big one. That's the big one in this whole area. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. Basis for determining the federal award. This is more on an agency level. States that determination of when a federal award is expected must be based on what the activity related to the federal award occurs. The period of time, are you running on a fiscal year of October 1 to September 30th? That's the time period. No more nor less if that's your audit period. That's what it says. Some other things here that reply more to the agency than to us. Frequency, usually annually. Biannually, if in rare occasions, but it's usually an annual process. Did I just skip one? 405. Did I miss anything? Nope, I'm good. 405 sanctions. Hopefully, this is something we don't have to talk about. When you see the phrase sanctions, you're talking about something happened. There was a finding or something, because a sanction states that in cases of continued inability or unwillingness to have an audit conducted in accordance with the federal guidelines of 2 CFR Part 200-338, remedies for noncompliance. These are situations where you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and there could be not only findings, but other more serious repercussions, such as sanctions, disbarment, even prison sentences. But, that's a super extreme situation. But, it's happened not with tribes that I know of, but, it's happened to other recipients of federal funds. But that's an extreme. It seems like I'm jumping over. Okay. 506, no change here. I'm not seeing anything. Audit cost remains the same, which means once you reach the platform or the level, currently at $750,000 in recipient as funds, then you're eligible to have a single audit, and the cost that's associated with it, as long as it's reasonable and done through your procurement protocols, you're good. So that's what it's talking about here, reasonably proportionate to the cost, to your program. If you're getting $500,000 a year and the audit team coming in from Deloitte is going to charge you $30,000, that might be a little extreme. First of all, you probably don't have that kind of money in your budget to start with to pay that kind of cost for one particular function. And secondly, it's out of whack out of sync with the funding that's being received. Now, if the tribe, on the other hand, brings in one of the top 3 companies and pays that kind of money for auditing all of its programs across the board, Like the Seminole Tribe must have 90 different grants. Now, if they're bringing in the big accounting firm to do the whole tribe and all of its programs, then I could see something like that because the audit team might be there for a month doing all the different departments, etc. But for just one program, one nonprofit, one department, you've got to put what you pay for what you get out of it and try with reasonable assurance to keep the costs as low as possible. 508 gets into your responsibility. You're the auditee. What do you need to do? And I want you to keep in mind that audits are more than just review of financial records. It states that the auditee must procure and arrange for the audit. In other words, you can spend the money to do the audit. It's allowable cost. And you must prepare, as it says at the end of that first sentence, you are responsible for preparing the appropriate financial documents, not just financial documents, as it says in the second paragraph, but your operational documents and your compliance documents as well, if you have any. The big picture, the total operation. Auditors are looking not just, of course, they're going to be looking at your financial operation, your financial statements and your transactions and your paper trails, financial paper trails, but they're also looking for your operational paper trails. Do you have signatures on all of your POs? Do you, is everything signed off on? Are all the approvals in place? Do you have protocols? Does everyone understand? Everyone that's employed in the department, everyone that has their finger in the operation, do they understand the process? So there might be some conversations between audit team and employees to see if they understand the process. They look at everything. So everything has to be, operational and up to snuff, up to in sync with all the current and proposed regulations and protocols and tribal policies, etc., and best practices too. All right, that's what it's talking about in the middle section there. Personnel, accounts, books, records, support documents, and of course, your financial documents. The bottom says the auditee must promptly follow up and take corrective action on audit findings. That's probably put there a little premature. We haven't got to audit findings yet and how to deal with them. We'll get to that. But that is your responsibility to follow up on anything that is discovered operationally, financially, or compliance-wise during an audit, or mostly operational. Audit selection, basically talked about that. You can select once you trip the $750,000 currently. You can use your procurement protocols if you want to do a sealed bid process to solicit an auditor. You can do that if you wish to follow that route. Or you can do a competitive, you don't have to do a sealed bid. You can take it another way and do it, through your normal procurement process. But you want to, because you got to treat it, your audit selection and the cost involved with it, you got to treat it like any other procurement, because it is a procurement. You're buying a service. Now, it's not an architect or an engineer or a general contractor, but it still is a professional service. So you treat it like that, and you treat it like any other procurement document. Okay. I think we're doing real good. Financial statements. Is there anything going on here? That's 510. Okay, let's see what it says. 510 indicates the auditee must prepare financial statements. Yes, they said that a couple citations. They're saying that sometimes they say the same thing in 3 different ways. Yes, auditees need to prepare financial statements and all of their operational and all of their insurance and everything, all those documents that reflect their financial position, have that. Yes, they need to do that. Auditee must also prepare a schedule of expenditures. Now, what they're talking about there are the normal, generally accepted accounting practice protocols that we need to have in place for any type of accounting process. 510, proposed changes. Let's see, clarifies the guidance of audits covering multiple recipients, such as departments and organizational units. Okay, I guess that reverts back to my example before, where the Seminole Tribe, for example, would bring in an auditor to do all of their departments and all of their grants, and it might take a month or 6 weeks. They're apparently coming out with they're fine tuning this 510 not so much changing the obligation of financial statements, but somehow some kind of verbiage, it's unclear yet, separating departments or organizational units. So we'll have to see what that says. Circle that one. There might be some clarification on that, hopefully, coming up, because I'm not sure what they're talking about in their cryptic message that they put out. Don't quite know. 11's not changing. Audit finding follow-up. With audits, hopefully you don't end up here with an audit finding to start with. Hopefully, when an audit occurs, we know now that they're going to be looking at everything, right? Financial, operational compliance. Hopefully, you're able to establish a rapport with the audit team, whether they're on site or off site, a rapport that they would come to you if they discovered something first before it ends up as a finding. In that way, even if it's minor, in that way, the goal would be to hopefully fix the problem before the auditors finish their audit. That would be the ideal situation. So it really never appears in the audit as a finding. That would be the ideal situation, that they come to you, they say, we discovered something, we want to share it with you, and you go, we can fix that. That is a internal protocol. It's a process. We're going to change it, and then we're going to reflect it in a revised policy and procedure as part of our internal controls. That would be the ideal situation. You would hope that you could do that. The next situation, next best, would be it ends up as a finding, it goes into the audit report, and you're able to address it before the audit is submitted to the audit clearinghouse so that the agencies can have access to it. That would be the second best treating, following up on an audit finding. And the third one, the last one that we don't want to be in ever, is that a finding occurs during the audit. It ends up on the audit report. It gets sent, like when your audit is done, like all audits do, it gets sent to the audit clearinghouse, and then the agencies download it and they see the big problem. We don't want that. This citation right here is saying it's your responsibility to address findings. I'm saying take a proactive approach with the auditor, so hopefully you can nip it in the bud before it gets to this point on finding. We don't want findings on our audit reports, right? We want pristine audit reports. States that the auditee is responsible for any follow-up and the corrective action plan. That is a phrase you need to be aware of. That is, one of the worst case scenario. A corrective action plan means there was a finding, you couldn't resolve it or didn't even know about it during the audit, and then it ends up as a finding. They tell you after the fact, and now you've got to put some kind of document together with your management team and address the issue in writing to the auditor's satisfaction. And now you're getting into the realm we don't want to put ourselves in. This is why we need to understand the significance of systems that fail. This is why we do self-monitoring. This is why we have internal control, so we can find these potential or real problems ourselves internally and fix them before they are noticeable to the public or noticeable to the auditors that come in. You want to do everything proactively in advance, so when they come in, we're not finding ourselves in a finding situation. We found something, This is where you don't want to be. Report submissions. The auditors have a time frame they got to work with. I don't see that changing. I don't see any notes on this. They basically have, as it says there, a 9-month window to complete after your fiscal year ends. So let's say your fiscal year ended September 30th, a couple months ago, and it's time for your audit. They should be on site, if not now, definitely in January, and they have a 9-month window from the end of your fiscal year to conduct the audit, finish it, share it with you, and submit it to the audit clearinghouse, the FAC. 9 months. So that would be September 30th. of 2024 if your fiscal year ended on September 30th. If you're on a calendar year and it's going to end in 10 days at the end of December, then you have to what? You have to the end of September of 24. That would be September 30 of 24. It's a 9-month window. Hopefully they're a little quicker than that. That they get it done. You've presented to them the information for them to expedite an audit without any problems. They're done. They submit it well before the 9-month window deadline. And that way you have not only them being happy, you being happy, you've got your federal agency being happy too, because they're going to be looking for that audit report. That's what they do. They go to the audit clearinghouse. This is what ONAP did. They go to the clearinghouse, they pull down the audit, they look at it, they look at any program reviews that you've had, and then, that's part of the equation for your subsequent funding for the next year, looking to make sure that you've got clean audits and that you are, as they say, low risk. Okay, that's coming up here too in this section, the definitions of high risk and low risk. So let's get going. We got another 15 minutes or so, and I want to kind of plow through this. No changes here in responsibilities. Is there any tribe in America that receives more than $50 million from one federal funding source? Tribes, no, not that I know of. Maybe, I don't know. Well, not that I know of, but there are recipients of federal funding, like the military, branches of the military that receive that. So remember, keep in mind, some of these audit requirements are designed for those big operations that receive big bucks. Normally, we are dealing with a fraction of that amount. Scope of the audit, 514, circle this one. This one might tighten up. You can pretty much guarantee it will, because they're potentially raising the threshold, right? From 750,000 to $1 million. When they do that, they usually tighten the screws on the scope of audit, making it more microscopic than it ever was before. It says in the middle there, the auditor must determine whether the financial statements of the auditee are represented fairly in all material aspects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and with your internal controls, as it says just below that, and all the other protocols that are in place. They're looking at the big picture here. Now, what I have is 514, what does it say? Excuse me, revises compliance requirements to include a test of transactions and other audit procedures necessary to provide the auditor with sufficient evidence to support an opinion on compliance. Okay, a lot of words there, a lot of government speak. My interpretation of that is tightening of the scope of audit more than ever to look to make sure that your compliance activities, your internal controls, your policies and procedures, and your compliance activities are written and that you follow them. So that's a message to people who are responsible for compliance. If anything, these protocols are going to tighten up. These requirements are going to get more restrictive. They're going to be looking closer and closer at our requirements, our internal controls, and making sure we follow them and that they're in sync with these regulations. Okay, scope of audit. So that's 514. Little change there. Go back, 515, audit reporting, no change there. The reports still have to be done. That's pretty straightforward. Findings, I circled that one. I do have, but I'm not sure if this one applies to us. This sounds more like it's more on the auditor side. Revises the definition of what's called the known questioned cost and likely question cost and provide further clarity. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means. I assume that that's part of the scope of work, which is tightening up along with risk calculation. So all of this is translating to more and more scrutiny being put on the funding recipients by the audit teams coming in. If they're following the federal guidelines here, they're going to be digging down a little bit deeper than ever before and making sure that all your protocols are in place. Okay, I don't have any other changes from this point on. 517 audit documentation. Yeah, got to get it done. They've got to submit it to the audit clearinghouse within the 9-month window. Program determination. Here's the high risk, low risk. Most of us are going to fall into that first blue bullet there. Equal or exceed 750,000, perhaps a million, right? Perhaps a million if it changes, but less than 25 million. They call that, according to the federal government, type A, which would classify us as low risk. So that's most of us, right? Any, $25 million from one federal funding source, that would be extreme from my experience for a tribal entity getting more than that kind of money from one source. So from a financial standpoint, I think the bulk of us are considered low risk, but there are other factors other than the dollar amount. Let's see if it goes on to talk about that. If not, I'll explain what I mean. Okay, well, yeah, kind of. Criteria for federal program risk, 519, no change here, states that the auditor's determination should be based on the overall evaluation of risk of non-compliance issues that could be material for the federal program. Current or prior audits could indicate a higher risk. So findings on prior audit, not just the dollar amount that we saw in the prior slide, which we all probably fall into the low risk category based on dollars received, but now they also look at your history of program reviews and prior audits. If there's any findings or concerns or problems, then that's part of the mix. And that would possibly, even though you might be low dollar, you might be classified as high risk. If you have any of these things, there should be 3 little blue bullets there. Current or prior audit experience, problems there, weakness in internal controls, what they call major deficiencies. Major deficiencies. That's a weakness in your internal controls, which means that your compliance is not doing what it should do. That's a problem. That could indicate a higher risk. And at the bottom, their prior audit findings definitely indicate higher risk. So dollar amount, I don't see as an issue. Most of us across the board, including the Seminole Tribe, is going to be at the low risk from a dollar standpoint. It's your track record that they're going to be looking at as well. And so it just behooves us to make sure we understand all of these things that are in the mix of making sure we are low risk. This whole thing about risk and fraud and cybersecurity and identity theft and hacking and all that stuff you see that this is all trickling down to us. They're tightening the screws. You might not even see this. You got to really dig deep to see these kind of things. And now that you've been exposed to it, unless you already knew this and you're an expert on this, I've been dealing with this for 12 years, almost every day. Even after retiring, I'm still dealing with it daily. So I'm involved with this. I understand the repercussions. You've got to at least have a surface level understanding of all the different subparts we went through, how to navigate, how to identify, how to interpret. And here, even in the auditing section, even though you're not an auditor, you're not a financial planner, you might not have anything to do with the financial transactions, at least you have an understanding and understand the repercussions of poor financial activity and what can happen if compliance and financial protocols and operational protocols are not in place. This is the worst case scenario. What could happen? And not only with a program audit, but also with program reviews would have the same significance. If your agency, like EWONAP, comes in and does the program review, it's not a quote unquote single audit, it's a program review. They're going to be following these protocols just the same. They're going to be following the auditing protocols because that's basically what they're doing. So that's why it says current and prior audit experience. Program review should be in here as well as a dedicated bullet, a problem there, or staff unsatisfied customers or staff calling the federal agency, making complaints about your operation, about your organization. Believe me, those things end up in the hands of the funding agency and eventually in the hands of the audit team or the program reviewers. So we want to do everything humanly possible, right, to mitigate all of these situations and to understand these regulations as they are written and as they could change. Now, the auditors have protocols for low risk and high risk. Okay, here's the definition. How do they treat a low risk? How much? It doesn't. Let's see if it goes on to talk about the high risk. No, it really doesn't define exactly what they're going to do if you're considered high risk. That would be in their scope of work. You might be able to get that from the audit team if you ask for it. What are they looking for? Hopefully, you've got a rapport with the audit team where they will, as I mentioned before, share information with you, particularly any discrepancies in operations before they become a finding. Okay, I have no other changes in here. This is the worst case scenario. This is, a corrective action plan on steroids. The management decision is just that. It's a corrective action plan. Something significantly bad was discovered. And it's not only a finding, it's a major discrepancy, which takes management intervention. That is absolutely the worst case scenario. We don't ever want to be in that. We don't even want to find it, let alone a management decision forced upon leadership because of significant major discrepancies in the program. Because they'll do that. Notice the funding opportunity. Oh, Appendix 1, no change. Oh, Appendix 1, if you're not familiar with it, they're talking about, I do have a note on that. This is in the 2 CFR Part 200 at the very back. There's some appendi back there. The full text notice I talked about a little bit before, that they're trying to clean up the notice of funding opportunity to make it, as you can see in the red there, more plain language, grouping things together. Right now, the notices of funding opportunities, if you've ever looked at them, they are so difficult to work with because they're disjointed. And the language that they use is all government speak. It's difficult to understand at a minimum. So that's crazy. It's crazy. Good. I'm glad to see that they are trying to make improvements. One last quiz for you here, then I have something else to share with you. Audit findings follow-up states that the auditee is responsible for what? Big time problems, corrective action plan, third-party opinion, second audit requirement, or the simplified acquisition threshold. What do you see as an answer to audit findings follow-up? The auditee is responsible for what? Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to tell you it is the corrective action plan, of course. And again, hopefully it's not anywhere you want to be. So before I turn this back over to Brooke, because we are at the very close to the bottom of the hour here, we've got our 90 minutes in, I want to share with you something else. In addition to the proposed changes that I've been harping about now for 2 days, they came out September 23rd, 3 months into it. There should be some kind of final notice coming out. We're waiting to see. I also have with that, I don't know if I have, let's see. Okay, I'm just going to keep it there. Thank you, Brooke. I got what I need there. I want to share with you at least 3 what they're calling highlights of other revisions and future updates. So not included with the update that came out September 23rd, but it's on, let's put it this way, it's on the OMB's, on the federal government's radar screen. These are things that they're talking about implementing, but I don't know even when those changes would even be proposed. But, make a note of these because I have at least 3 of them here I want to share with you before we close out. 1, establish, and these are their words, not mine, establishing mechanisms to automatically adjust certain thresholds due to inflation or other triggering events. Interesting. So all those thresholds that they have built into their system, like the one we just talked about with the audit threshold, 750, now proposing to 1 million, maybe that will kind of be on audit cruise here where it will be adjusted, kind of like wages are adjusted and cost of living adjustment. So we'll see how that pans out. Right now, it's very random. Who knows when they'll adjust it again. Okay, so that's one. The second one is removing even more prior approvals. They want to get away from that, the prior approval. I love it. I applaud that. So that's the second one, moving away. We talked about the 15 that are in effect now. They want to remove 10. That would be great. And hopefully what this is saying is they would remove even the remaining 5 or most of them. So that would be great, but that's way down in the future. And the last one here, expanding the guidance in Subpart F. We just finished Subpart F, audits, to include more specific requirements on the scope of the audit, which they're calling the phrase prior perspective, so that federal agencies have additional context, as they call it, contextual information, more context to guide them in resolving audit findings, quote unquote. So I don't know what that means, if that's good or bad for us on a daily basis, expanding specific requirements in the scope of audit to include what they call proper perspective. I guess maybe more criteria to help them determine high risk, low risk, and whether resolved audit findings can be removed from the calculation of a high risk. Because I said before that, prior audit findings, even if they're done after the audit closes, can work against you and move you from low risk to high risk as a federal funding recipient. Maybe what they're saying here is they're kind of opening this up for interpretation. What is a resolved audit finding? So that's interesting. That's the way I look at it. Maybe they're expanding their horizons to take in consideration a resolved audit finding and not, taking it more than just face value that they've resolved it, but we're not going to change them from high risk back to low risk. Now it sounds like they might open up that possibility for more interpretation. That'd be wonderful if they did that. That would allow tribal entities and other recipients of funding that had a finding that resolved it within a reasonable amount of time can defend that and perhaps have it, how do they say in the court system, expunged, removed from their portfolio, not even looked at. That would be great if we got to that level. But I think that's a hope and a dream right now. I don't know. Those 3 that I just told you are kind of on a wish list, but it's not my wish list. It's the wish list. It's the list that came out from O&B. So this could be real stuff. They have a couple other things on here, but they're more agency driven, and I don't think they affect us on a daily basis, tribes or tribal entities. So that's all I have, folks. I'm so glad that I was able to give this information to you. Many, my hat's off to you for dealing with this for 2 days. 3 hours of federal guidelines. That's that's not easy to go through. It's not easy to present in a good way, and it's not easy to tolerate. I know from experience it's difficult, but I want to thank everyone for their patience and their interest in this program and for sticking with it. We had 24 plus or minus in the session today. Thank you very much. Brooke has put up a well, I'll let you talk about it and close out, Brooke. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks so much, Vince. Reminder, everybody, this was session 2 of 2. The recording link is in the web links for yesterday's session, as well as the PDF of the slides. So if you missed yesterday's, you can access those materials through what is displayed on your screen right now in the files and web links pod. I launched it once before. I'm going to launch it a second time. I'm opening up the link for today's webinar feedback survey. If you guys could take just a minute to fill that in for us. It's anonymous, helps us to do more of what's working well, and helps us to know what could be improved upon so we can continue serving you even better. Our next webinar is going to be after the Christmas holiday, that Thursday on December 28th. This one is part of the HR series given by Lisa Perez. This one's on record keeping and onboarding file audit checklist for tribal housing. As always, registration is free. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. We have a whole Cathedra webinar section, and in there is a recorded webinars tab, and you can find all the recordings of our webinars for the past 2 years. So feel free to check those out, share them with your friends and colleagues. And check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a podcast titled the Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. So you can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can see the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. All right, folks. Sorry, guys, technical difficulties. All right, so once again, I want to thank you for your participation and for joining us today. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of your holiday season, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year if you celebrate. And we hope to connect with you guys really soon.